Hey everyone, my next video here that I wanted to make relevant to this chapter, unless you're watching this one first, talks about the different training methods. Your textbook does a pretty good job of going over some of the training methods, but in my opinion, it sort of goes through them in brief detail, and then it talks about in great detail how to do icebreakers, how to introduce people and speakers. I'm not going to get into that. I'm not going to quiz you over that material. I want you to know in general the different methods of training, and I want to turn around and give you some advantages and disadvantages to each. Most of the training I think should be broken down really into two different categories. One is that kind of training that you do for your employees who are what I call non-supervisory employees. Those are the men and women who are not the bosses, are not the line leaders, who are not the foremen and forewomen, whatever you'd like to refer to them as, and so on, and those that are. So let's begin by talking about what are called non-supervisory employees. All right. There are a handful of different ways to train non-supervisory employees, and I'll talk about the apprenticeship element here in just a moment. Probably the most commonly used method of training employees is what is called OJT, on-the-job training. Okay, on-the-job training is just as the name implies. If a person's going to learn the job, they're actually going to learn it right there on the spot at the very place that they're going to do the job. They learn exactly what it is they're supposed to do, and there is basically no issue, no concern about having to go somewhere else and do the job separate from the training location. And that really is one of its biggest advantages to on-the-job training, learning the job at the site. For example, a person may turn around and have to work a cash register. With on-the-job training, an employee may turn around and teach them this method basically right at the very cash register that they're going to use. All right. The big advantage is what we call positive transfer. Transfer of training refers to the ability to take what you've learned in one environment and apply it in another. For me, in the world of playing golf, I'm just nothing more than an amateur golfer at best. I and many others who like golf will go to the what's called the driving range or the putting range, excuse me, and practice. Well, then you have to take what you've learned there and actually go out and play golf. And sometimes that transfer of training doesn't work well. With on-the-job training, it does tend to work well. It's very positive because you're learning it in the very place that it has to be learned. There is a disadvantage to this worth mentioning, and that is for a lot of times the people doing the training are other employees. They're not trained supervisors. They're not people from a training department. They're other employees. And sometimes what happens is that you get other employees who just take advantage of an individual. They just have them do their job while they stand off to the side and do nothing. I've seen that an awful lot. I'm training them. Well, what are you doing? What are you teaching them? I've asked that of people. Well, I'm just letting them do it, and I'll let them know if they mess up. Well, they're not learning things. Another big disadvantage is that sometimes the person who does the training turns around and doesn't teach well. They teach shortcuts. They don't explain why they're doing what they're doing. And so employees who are learning things at the job site aren't learning the how and the why aspects of a particular task, and therefore there's confusion, and that can cause problems as well. Know also that sometimes trainers resent the fact that they are having to do this. They see it as below them. They sometimes worry that they're training their replacement, and sometimes that's justifiably true. So people will sabotage training because they don't want someone to come in and take their job. Really, the biggest thing that we tell people when it comes to on-the-job training and working with this individual who is going to be the trainer, don't always assume that the best person who does a particular job is the best trainer. Okay, don't assume that that individual who does it better than anyone else can actually teach it to others, because that's not always the case. Sometimes we have to, as the term goes, train the trainer. And by training the trainer, you're making sure that this person, first of all, knows they're not training their replacement, uh, that they cannot just have them do, their job for them, and make sure they teach them the right techniques. And so this takes time to train the trainer. Good human resource department can help with that, and it's very, very important that they do so. Excuse me. The next big aspect is the apprenticeship. I say big aspect, it's big because it can be very time consuming and very all inclusive. The apprenticeship program, unfortunately, is dying off. We don't see as much of this. Apprenticeships are often done at other sites rather than the job site. For example, OTC itself has a procedure where you turn around and you go through the chef's apprenticeship program before going out and becoming a chef. So a lot of it is learned right here in a very controlled environment. A lot of unions will teach individuals, or technical colleges will teach individuals things away from the actual job site so they can learn the skills involved with this. The nice thing about apprenticeships is that sometimes we see apprenticeships done, you learn very specific elements of what the job is all about. You learn the how-tos and the whys and all of that kind of stuff. So that's a very big advantage. You don't learn it on site, you learn it prior to getting there. And so by the time you show up on site, having passed the program, a lot of times you're in very good shape to help out. Probably the biggest problem I've seen with apprenticeships is that they take time, and that a lot of times they can take years, 1 or 2 or 3 years apprenticeship status, chef's apprenticeship or a journeyman apprenticeship and things like that to learn technical trades, that basically people don't always have the patience for it. And that's sad, because if you do get through it, it can be a good thing. Once in a while, you will see situations where unions want people to be technically trained, but they don't want them to turn around and flood the market, because if you flood the market with new apprentices that, say, welders, for example, it can actually drive down cost, that some people have been in there a long, long time can be underbid by someone else. Excuse me. So once in a while, some unions and some people, I'm not slamming the unions at all, don't misunderstand, will actually lengthen out the training time from a year to 2 years, or from 2 years to 3 years, to allow for attrition and retirement and people getting out of the field. And some people don't want to wait that long. So that can definitely be a problem. These are two of our training for non-supervisory. There are more, and I want to cover them here real quick. I'm not done. Another thing that we will sometimes do is use what is called vestibular training or vestibule training. Another term for this is simulator training. And basically, what you're doing is, instead of going out to the work site and actually doing the job on site, you turn around and you learn the job at using simulators. Airlines have simulators. You don't go and fly a plane and learn it as you fly. You climb into the simulator, and then basically you learn it there. Many people who have taken CPR classes will realize that they have these, for lack of a better term, the simulator dummies that you can practice on and things like that. Even OTC in their allied health program has a couple of simulators, very technical simulators, to learn how to handle situations in a delivery room, in a home. If you're going to be a paramedic, you can actually practice these things. Even turning around and doing some basic simulations can be helpful, because, well, for a number of reasons. The biggest advantage of a simulator is that you don't break things. You don't turn around and go out and actually break the equipment. You practice and you learn it in a very safe environment. You don't want to turn around and learn how to fly a $1 million jet by just on the job. You've got to practice and practice and practice. So that can save you a lot of money in that regard. The big disadvantage is cost. A lot of these things can cost an awful lot of money. Airline simulators are very, very expensive. Even the CPR dummies that they use are not cheap. but some can be. They're not always have to be terribly expensive. I was reading where to teach a diabetic how to give oneself, a shot. They will practice on oranges and things like that rather than stick each other and so on and so forth, which I think is a fantastic way of doing it. So the big disadvantage is cost. Uh, Sometimes what happens is a little bit of transfer of training issue as well. With transfer training, keep in mind that what we're talking about here is what you learn in the simulator, does it transfer over to the actual job? If you get new equipment uh, to use on a job site and you really want to be up to date, you have to get the exact same equipment for your simulator, for your vestibule training. A lot of times that's very expensive. So what do? You take the old equipment, which is being retired from the workshop floor, from actual use, and it becomes your simulator equipment. That can work, but if there are differences between the new and the old equipment, you've got to point them out, or you're going to learn methods in the wrong way. So vestibule training is a fantastic way, simulator training, but it can be a bit expensive to do, and it can be time consuming. Usually there are men and women whose sole job with the company is to run training and run the simulators. And it's not done by on-the-job people, on-the-job training individuals and things like that. So it's not cheap. Okay. The next type is what we call computer-aided instruction. And really what you're doing as this class is, an online class, is computer-aided instruction. You're watching videos and looking at PowerPoints and, responding to discussions on Canvas and things like that. That really is computer-aided instruction in that regard. And there really is two types. There is what we call asynchronous and what we call synchronous training. Now, asynchronous training is really what you go through here, which basically means that people can watch taped videos. They can do things at their own speed, their own time. They don't have to all be doing it all simultaneously at the same time. And that's what synchronous training is. Where synchronous training is that basically everybody is online, everybody is doing it all the same time, in that regard. That sometimes doesn't work very well, even in an online class such as this, because I've had students, honest to goodness, who in one semester I had a student who was in Germany and another student in the exact same class who was in Japan. So they were almost literally on different ends of the planet, along with my other 23 students that were in and around, Springfield, Missouri. And so trying to do a live discussion with all 25 was impossible. One would be, late in the evening, the other would be late in the morning, and everybody else is, mid-afternoon. It just wouldn't work. Computer-aided instruction can be pricey, it can be expensive, it can be time-consuming to put together, but it does work well for individuals who are, having to do this on their own time. And a lot of programs are going to this. You learn things on your own time. You're given a package, you're given a packet. It's asynchronous. Do it on your own time. And when you get it done, we'll move you on to the next thing. So that's a big one. One that we don't use a lot of, but is worth mentioning, is what is called behavior modification. Behavior modification is probably the least of these training methods. What you're trying to do is train people to do better behavior. Okay, for example, absenteeism. You want to cut back on absenteeism. There really are two things you can do for this. You can turn around and punish people, or for not showing up, or you can use positive behavior modification. If you show up, basically we will reward you. The concept behind behavior modification is that you're minimizing punishment. And if you're wanting to create a certain behavior, develop a behavior in someone, you reward them for the time and effort. I think one of the best examples I ever saw of behavior modification occurred in a large organization that was losing close to $50,000 throughout the entire corporation every single month in lost wages because people calling in sick. So what they did was they started offering incentives to employees who were showed up to work every single day they were supposed to and not calling in sick. unless they absolutely positively had to, and that would be that they would all receive a $25 gift card, or they would be put into a drawing for something, and the total cost of what they were giving away was about $10,000 a month, but they cut their absenteeism in half, and so you save $25,000 that you're not paying out anymore in lost wages, and it costs you $10,000. So you're making a profit of $15,000 every single month by putting together this behavior modification program that rewards people for showing up. It's just one method. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing at all. The last category I want to talk about is training your supervisors, your bosses, the men and women who are managers of different levels and so on. You can do a lot of things here, but basically what we're talking about as ways to learn how to become managers. One method you can use is what is called job rotation. We see this a lot with new employees who are going to be managers, that they show up and after going through orientation, sometimes they're surprised that now that they're entry-level managers, they think they're going to be in their professional attire and sitting behind a desk. And what some companies will do is to turn around and actually have them out doing the jobs of the non-supervisory people. The premise is that you better understand the jobs that the other people are doing, all the different jobs, then you can be a better manager. If you don't do that, you don't understand the jobs, it's harder to manage people. I think it was a company called Uniroyal Tire who many years ago spent a week doing orientation, and then after orientation was over, they spent about a week working on the floor. So you come back the following Monday, not in your dress clothes, but in your, jeans, and be willing to get dirty clothes. And one day you're working on the docks, another day you're working on the assembly line, another day you're working dealing with defects and things like that. And so each day you are being rotated to a new job. There can be advantages and disadvantages to this, but that's generally the premise. You're going to be a better employee, better manager, if you know what the people below you are doing. There's also what we call a case method, and sometimes these are very, very good, especially with lectures and that you give people situations to take what they've learned and apply them. Some case methods are actual scenarios. The discussions you've done are a version of case methods where I ask you to review the content of a given chapter and then write up a discussion, comments and things like that relevant to it, from the different companies and how things are handled, from the New London Police Department to Coles and others. Those are all case methods, and how you respond to those things in an actual scenario that's happened before is a chance to get some practice in. In the world of business and finance, we will sometimes see what are called business games. Now, to be honest with you, I don't see a lot of business games being done at work sites. I see them done more in educational institutions. That's their version of training. One of the big ones I saw one time was in a finance class where people are going to be working as stockbrokers, where everyone was given a fictitious amount of money to turn around and buy stocks, actual stocks that were on the stock market at that time for certain values. And the teacher actually kept this all going in a computer program that you could take your $1 million and see, buy certain stocks, and over the span of about 8 weeks, see what kind of profit or loss you would actually make. This was real good for finance and management. And the person who turned around and, got the highest score got bragging rights. If you turned around and, chose poorly and hardly chose at all, that was a problem. At the end of the 8-week period, you would cash out and see how much money that you purportedly had based on what you had bought and sold and stuff like that. And it made for a very competitive situation. So there are actual business games that are like that, and they can be very, very good. There are even packages that you can buy to run simulated businesses and things like that. And how do you how do you spend your money on payroll, research and development, and so on. That's what these business games are about. So if you're going into business, that's not a bad thing. Role playing is one that can actually be applied throughout great deal of all of this, not just for the supervisory employee, but even the non-supervisory employee. Role playing is all about addressing specific behaviors. And if it's taken seriously, it can be very, very helpful. Some companies will actually practice it right there at the work site. They'll ask people to step up and play out certain roles. You learn how to handle certain situations and so on. Law enforcement does role playing a great deal in their training because you have to be prepared for an awful lot of things. If people don't take it seriously, it's a waste of time. But if people do take it seriously, it can be very, very, very helpful. It really can. Okay. All right, folks. That's all I've got for this one. Gone through a number of different programs. Keep up the good work.